I wouldn't say that. It was the same as it was in qualifying, you know. So, but the pace was decent, and it felt a little bit better in race trim than it did in qualifying. The delta wasn't as big to everyone around, and managed to avoid the drama at turn one. I didn't really position my car that particularly well. I saw Alonso on the inside, so I went a bit to the right and then left the door open for Charles. So lots of improvements to still be made, but otherwise the start was good. Shame I couldn't get close enough to get in the top three, but I'm hoping for a better qualifying today, so fingers crossed.
Also after the flag, no overtaking. That's a P4. Good job out there. Good points for the team. And Chardon. Double yellow, turn 3, 4, 5. Now he's clear. Check for clear. And still no overtaking and pickup.
Everyone's going super slow, mate. We can't do any overtaking.
I like that. Stay where you are.
Normally after a race you're allowed to overtake.
Understood. Okay, you can overtake if you need. And come back in the pit lane.
Yeah, yeah, I know, mate. Say that.
Can you imagine that Hamilton, in his second year with Ferrari, completely surprised his own team after a lightning comeback? What if I told you that neither Vasseur nor Leclerc saw what happened in the Austin sprint coming? The sprint qualifier was, in a single word, humiliating. Not only because of the final result, but because of the message that the time sent. Charles Leclerc finished in 10th position, more than a second behind pole sitter Max Verstappen, while Lewis Hamilton, with all his experience and skill, barely managed to sneak in 8th, also with a deficit of almost 9/10. But the most revealing image was not that. It was seeing Ferrari customer Nico Hülkenberg's Sauber qualify 4th. A car with fewer resources, less development, and with the same engine, managed to do what the SF25 could not: be competitive. For the Ferrari technicians, this result was an unmitigated sentence. If the engine is not the problem because the Sauber was running well, then it is the chassis, suspension, aerodynamics, thermal management. The whole package is under scrutiny. This is not an emotional conclusion, it is purely technical. The SF25 is a car with an extremely narrow performance window, which only seems to work under specific conditions. And the Circuit of the Americas, with its high-speed corners combined with aggressive braking, exposed every weakness. The frustration was evident in the statements after qualifying. Lewis Hamilton held nothing back. He said verbatim that the car became very difficult to drive, and that after a promising start in free practice, the performance simply disappeared. What struck him most was the inconsistency. In SQ1, Ferrari seemed to be within the competitive range. But as soon as the pace and technical demand increased, the car collapsed. And that pattern has been repeated race after race since the rear suspension update introduced in Belgium, an evolution that in theory was supposed to provide stability, but in practice has raised more questions than answers. Charles Leclerc, for his part, offered an even bleaker diagnosis. He spoke of a general loss of time in all phases of the return. It was not a problem of traction or top speed exclusively. It was a car that did not work in any sector. The most worrying thing about his words was his resignation. He stated that he did not believe they would find an immediate solution, and that even with a clean lap like the one he ran in SQ3, there was no more performance to extract. The Monegasque's body language also spoke. Crossed his arms, without smiling, with his voice lower than usual. The tension within the team is palpable. Not because of an isolated bad result, but because it is becoming a trend. Ferrari has not only stagnated, it has begun to regress compared to teams like Mercedes or even McLaren, who seem to have better understood the technical demands of the new regulations. Friday's day then was not just a bad day. It was an unmistakable sign that Ferrari is losing ground. That the SF25 needs much more than an aerodynamic adjustment or an optimized strategy. needs a structural review. Because when a customer car like Sauber manages to overshadow the Maranello officials, the problem is no longer one of execution. It's concept. The 2025 US GP sprint race was not simply an exhibition of speed, it was a declaration of principles. In a hostile technical context and with all predictions pointing to a discrete performance by Ferrari, Lewis Hamilton staged a comeback that not only altered the competitive order of the weekend, but also exposed the true margin of difference between talent and engineering. It was one of those performances that redefined narratives and forced rivals and even the team itself to re-evaluate their certainties. The chaos in the early stages of the sprint favored those who knew how to keep a cool head. And Hamilton, with decades of experience at the highest level, understood from the first corner that he could not afford to wait for the SF25 to get into rhythm. There was no room for that. The key was to read the flow of the race better than anyone else and take advantage of every mistake, every slight gap, every doubt in the rearview mirror of his rivals. This is how, with surgical movements, he managed to recover 4 positions in just 19 laps. But reducing this comeback to a question of positioning would be to dangerously simplify what happened. The real merit was in how he managed to extract performance from a car that, based on previous data and analysis, should not be in a position to fight. And this is where the real intrigue begins. Based on subsequent telemetry analysis, Hamilton was able to keep the tires within a more stable operating window than his own teammate, adjusting the driving style almost instinctively. Instead of attacking the corners aggressively, which would have caused graining in the front tires, as happened with Leclerc, Hamilton opted for a more fluid line, using the engine's torque to modulate cornering, minimizing lateral load transfer and reducing thermal stress on the tires. It was a masterclass in technical management executed in real time. The degradation of the SF25 with medium tires was one of the most critical points pointed out by the engineers. And yet, Hamilton seemed to neutralize that Achilles heel through pure driving. While others suffered with the drop in performance in the second sector, especially in turn 11 and when passing through the S's, he maintained a constant pace, without sudden losses of traction or overheating of the rear axle. It was evident that he had found a hidden mode for the car, a way to adapt it to his needs without requiring changes to the setup. The most disconcerting thing was the reaction of the Ferrari wall. The language that Frédéric Vasseur used in his subsequent statements was revealing. He said Lewis' performance was inspiring, but they did not understand how he managed to stabilize the car under conditions that the simulations showed were not favorable. That admission, although diplomatic, is dangerous for a team that aspires to fight for the title. If your own technical team can't explain why a car that was off the pace the day before ends up being one of the fastest in the race, then the problem goes deeper than a bad qualifying session. It is a lack of structural understanding of the car. Charles Leclerc, for his part, was visibly shocked. He also made up some positions, but his pace was erratic, especially in the last third of the sprint. On the radio, he expressed that he was not comfortable with the response of the front axle, even after the team made tire pressure adjustments. But seeing his companion advance without hesitation, the frustration became difficult to hide. Not out of jealousy, but because he understood that the car's problem was not absolute, but relative to how it was driven. And that, in Hamilton's hands, became an advantage. The entire paddock took note. The Mercedes team, in silence, carefully observed each piece of information. At Red Bull, engineers speculated whether Ferrari had found a hidden engine map. But the reality was different. There was no magic. Just a driver who, after more than a decade at the top, still has the ability to rewrite the narrative of a weekend with his hands. This sprint race was, therefore, much more than an opportunity to score points. It was Hamilton's first big hit as a Ferrari driver. A clear message not only to his rivals but to his own. The SF25 may not be ready to win, but he is. And if Ferrari can understand what Lewis managed to do in those 19 laps, they could be at the key to redirecting a season that, until now, seemed lost. Once the euphoria of Hamilton's comeback had passed, Ferrari was forced to face a problem that it can no longer mask with vague statements or promises of future development. The SF25 in its current state is not a consistently competitive car. What began as a simple concern during the first preseason sessions has ended up consolidating itself as a critical technical pattern. The car does not have a wide performance window. In fact, it has one of the narrowest of the entire grille. This technical division is more than a matter of preference. It is a symptom of a project that has lost conceptual coherence. The SF25 was born as an evolution of the SF24, a car that already had problems in slow corners, but that at least offered an acceptable general balance. The new version has not resolved those limitations, and in its attempt to be more aerodynamically efficient, it has created a more sensitive, more unstable and more unpredictable car. In this context, Ferrari's planning for the rest of the championship is on hold. Design decisions for 2026 should be made in the coming weeks, but how to do it if you still don't fully understand the mistakes of the current car? Vasseur is faced with a complex dilemma. Invest more resources in trying to fix a failed car, or start from scratch with a view to the following year. In any case, what is now undeniable is that after this race, Ferrari is no longer the same team. Not because they have won, but because someone within their ranks has shown them that they can still be greater than they themselves believe. There is only one question left to answer. Will they be able to rise to the challenge?